Hello and welcome back to Arts of Hermes. This is the second and final part of our video on China Miéville's novella, The Last Days of New Paris. I definitely recommend that you watch part 1 first before watching this part 2, so if you've not already seen it, you can find a link to it in the description below. Now, here in part 2, we'll really be getting into the core and heart of the novella and just spending our whole time there, following the main character, Thibaut, who is a surrealist resistance fighter in his journeys through Nazi and demon-occupied New Paris. But before we get into that material, I just wanted to both follow up on and kind of connect together some things we talked about in part 1 with what will be coming, the next, not just the next video, but the next series that will be starting after this video, looking at Eliphas Levi. So towards the end of, or a good chunk of what was the end portions of part 1 of this video, we talked about the way that the novel imaginatively constructs a kind of conjunction between Aleister Crowley and Andre Breton. And in starting to work on the material for the next video, towards the end of the first video, I had started to lose my voice. It turned out I was coming down with a cold, so my voice is finally recovered. But while my voice was recovering, I started working on the next video on Eliphas Levi, talking about his biography and setting up a bunch of the sort of social and political and cultural context for Levi. And I really started to think about his influence on future esoteric and other developments, and thinking about how we can see, it's quite obvious that Aleister Crowley is a kind of descendant of Eliphas Levi. I mean, Crowley even understood himself as the reincarnation of Eliphas Levi. But I think we can really also see Andre Breton as someone who comes out of Eliphas Levi or inherits perhaps like a different portion of Eliphas Levi's legacy. And I don't know, it just suggested to me another way of thinking about this connection between Breton and Crowley, thinking about them both as kind of inheritors of different portions of Eliphas Levi's legacy. So I think there's perhaps in bringing them back together here, there's the suggestion of a development of aspects of what is contained, if not explicitly, at least contained in potential in a lot of Eliphas Levi's works. So yeah, hopefully I think this video will actually kind of set us up rather nicely for looking at some of the more radical implications of Levi's own works and how they have the echoes of those works have continued on into the 20th century. I mean, Levi is often, as we'll talk about it, quite dismissed in contemporary occult circles. He's seen as very kind of passé, and rejected for a variety of reasons. But maybe something about this framing can help to sort of recover something that is still fresh and unrealized potentials that are still there in Levi's work. So I hadn't consciously intended to do that, but it's, I think, worked out quite nicely that way. All right, so you'll recall from part 1 that we did a summary of the overall contents of the novella, and then we also looked at the frame, towards the end of the video there, we looked at the frame narrative, and then within the main narrative, we also looked at the material that takes place in 1941 that helps to set up and explain and develop some of the implications and the more philosophical and symbolic depth of the nature of this world and what's happened to it. But now, with all of that in place, we can move into the real heart of the material in 1950. Now, this 1950 material is much more, it's kind of an adventure story, much more action-packed. And it's really this 1950 material that has the video game feeling, which suggests anyways that this material was, if not literally written first, at least conceived of first, and that the 1941 material and the frame narrative, all of that was built up around the kind of core idea of these sort of adventures and struggles within Nazi and demon-occupied New Paris, using this kind of resistance fighter who utilizes surrealist methods in his resistance struggle. Now, the actual sequence of the actual story of this 1950 material, I think, is not actually incredibly compelling. So instead of following out the narrative sequence, we are instead just going to look at some of the details that are developed throughout this sequence and follow up some and make kind of jump around and make symbolic and thematic connections. So Thibault is a member of a group known as the Men à Plume, which the novella describes as surrealist stay-behinds, soldiers of the unconscious. It's a great phrase. Stay-behinds here, or a stay-behind operation, is one in which soldiers or operatives kind of go underground as an enemy force advances or as a territory is occupied, and they remain behind enemy lines and conduct clandestine activities. So they are here in Nazi-occupied Paris, engaging in the resistance to the occupation. Now, the Men à Plume were a real group. Now, in the novella, of course, we get a slightly fantastic version of them, but they are based on a real group who were surrealist and surrealist affiliated writers and artists who, unlike Andre Breton and many of the other more prominent members of the surrealist movement who fled after the Nazi occupation, this of course would be a lot of the people that Jack Parsons meets in Marseille in the 1941 sections of the book. The Men à Plume remain in Paris, and this is the really significant thing, they both continue their surrealist activities. They continue to publish and to make art and write poetry, and they have several surrealist publications, one of which we see on the screen here, the Information Surrealiste was one of their publications. So they continue their surrealist activities, but they're also engaged in armed struggle, and they, as we'll talk about more in a moment, they refuse to choose one or to privilege one over the other. Now here within New Paris, which as I've been reading it anyways, exists in the realm of the imagination or in the imaginal itself, these two activities become one and the same in a way that they are not in our world. Where here in New Paris, radical, liberatory, subversive works of poetry or art or articulations of those sorts of liberatory visions are fully united with armed struggle against a fascist occupation. So the Men à Plume become the perfect kind of group for which this struggle can take place. So the name Men à Plume they got from a poem by Arthur Rimbaud from his A Season in Hell. So Rimbaud writes, and this is from Wallace Fowler's translation, Rimbaud writes, "I loathe all trades, all of them. Foremen and workmen are base peasants. A writer's hand is no better than a plowman's." So this phrase, a writer's hand, this is la main à plume. Man, of course, is hand, and then plume means pen, but is literally feather, like obviously coming from the feather pens. So I think there's the sort of surrealist eye is reading in a more kind of literal interpretation of that, like a feathered hand, rather than simply the writer's hand. There's obviously a kind of surrealist image suggested by that phrase. Now, Rimbaud is, I think, one thing that makes A Season in Hell a somewhat difficult poem to interpret and to understand is the various conflicting and contradictory sort of voices through which Rimbaud speaks and the layers of irony throughout the poem. So Rimbaud is here, on the one hand, expressing a real anti-work attitude, and Rimbaud's own articulations of a resistance to work, not necessarily a resistance to labor, but specifically a resistance to work, which we can understand as wage labor or alienated labor, ends up continuing to be influential on the Surrealists and later groups that come out or are influenced by the Surrealists, like the Situationist International, a lot of like the events of May 1968 in Paris, which was really influenced both by the Situationist International as well as the Surrealists and some of their slogans. Never work, of course, was one of their slogans, and then continuing to influence number of groups, like in the kind of post-68 groups, radical groups, and then the New Left, other groups in Italy, and this kind of sort of post-68 radical groups that are all influenced by this anti-work vision. But at the same time, Rimbaud is also seeing the writer or the artist, the poet, as a laborer and as a worker like others, which I think maybe there's a suggestion in the novel that equation of or seeing artists and writers as just another kind of worker, another kind of laborer, I think maybe also is related to seeing the surrealist artistic activities and publications as just another form of resistance, like armed struggle is also. Also, we get this publication that I have the image here from Information Surrealiste. We see up by the title there the image of these black chains that are on fire. Obviously, an image of liberation, the destruction of chains, the destruction of binding and imprisoning forces. That's an image that we'll get later on in the novel. So just to make the timelines even more fragmented and potentially disorienting, while we are following Thiebaud in 1950, we also get flashbacks to earlier stages in the struggle, including scenes of the period where, in the early 1940s, where Thiebaud first makes contact with the Men à Plume and requests to join their group. Now, to see if he's fit to be one of them, the Men à Plume run him through a series of tests, including a rather amusing sequence where they sort of set up different combinations of objects, and then Thiebaud has to say which of these combinations are surreal and which are not. And what emerges here is that Thiebaud has a special sort of innate ability to determine what is surreal and to recognize the surreal quality, which later develops into his ability to communicate with and work with the exquisite corpses and other surrealist manifs in New Paris in a way that no one else can. But anyways, during this testing sequence, they ask him a question that I think brings out something important. So let's see, the man quizzing him says, "You want to fight, I understand," the half-shod man said, looking at him sideways. "Right now, though, with all this, why like this? Why with us? With the city like this, don't we have greater needs than poetry?" Immediately, Thiebaud almost shouted a response. "We refuse to flee poetry for reality," he said, "but we refuse to flee reality for poetry." The men and women blinked at him. "No one should say our actions are superfluous," Thiebaud recited. "If they do, we'll say, the superfluous supposes the necessary." So here Thiebaud is quoting from publications by the Men à Plume, and is articulating this idea of the complementary nature of surrealist and artistic and poetic resistance with armed resistance and other forms of concrete resistance to the occupation. All right, and then we'll just continue to jump around and look at some passages that feature interesting appearances of surrealist art within the world of New Paris, or that develop some of the themes that we've already been talking about here, or that we did set up in part one. So let's see, here is a passage from earlier on in the novella where Thiebaud is considering giving up the struggle and trying to find a way out of New Paris. So in the first paragraph, we get an image drawn from René Magritte's painting, The Empire of Light, which you see on your screen here. And then the second paragraph here develops some of our themes we've just been talking about. So we read, "Each riverbank tree here is in a different season, dead leaves and live. Thiebaud wants railway lines, routes out. Under one lamppost it is night. He leans against it and sits, and for long minutes looks up at stars. Do I even deserve these places anymore? They came at the wrong time, and they came in the wrong way. Liberation was fucked up. But if Thiebaud can find no spark of joy in them, he thinks, maybe he is no better than one of Stalin's men, or a drone for de Gaulle, an enemy of true freedom. That isn't me, he thinks. No." Another example of surrealist artworks appearing within New Paris, and I think this one is also particularly interesting in the way that, so one source that Miéville draws on throughout for the surrealist manifestations within New Paris is a document published in, I forget which surrealist journal that was now off the top of my head, but a kind of group writing where the surrealist group made various suggestions for surrealist alterations to the city of Paris, like, for example, the removing the bottom half of the Eiffel Tower, but leaving the top part in place, obviously just hanging in midair, which is an image that actually gets used on the covers of some editions of the Last Days of New Paris. Or another image that appears in the novella is the turning the Arc de Triomphe on its side and transforming it into a giant urinal. So you can see not just a surrealist sensibility, but also the real, anti-nationalist sentiment there. Now, one of the suggestions was to remove the Lion of Belfort from its plinth so that the plinth would just be empty. Now, Miéville, I think in an interesting way, takes that image and further elaborates it and combines it with images from Max Ernst's collage novel, Une semaine de bonté, where the material for the Sunday, the novel or whatever novella, collage novel, is split up into 7 sections corresponding to the 7 days of the week, which, at least in some days of the week, correspond to the planet that rules that day. So for Sunday, we get all these images of lion-headed figures, because of course Sunday is the day of the sun, and the lion is a traditional animal correspondence to the sun. So he combines these images together, and we read, in Place d'Enfer Rochereau, the Lion of Belfort has disappeared from its plinth. Surrounding the empty platform where the black statue used to stare stiff-legged are now a crowd of stone men and women, all with the heads of lions. So Miéville has combined 2 surrealist images together here, and I think in a powerful way. So this, the Lion of Belfort, as we can see on the front of the plinth, is a monument to the defense of Paris in 1870 into 1871 against the Prussian army. But of course, the Prussian invasion of France, this also happens, and of Paris, also happens right before the Paris Commune, which begins in the spring of 1871. And so by removing this nationalist symbol of the French standing up against this German, this Prussian invasion, removing that image and instead replacing it with a crowd of lion-headed figures, I think kind of suggests that the monument has ceased to be a nationalist monument and become instead a kind of monument for the Paris Commune, which I think is a really great way of developing that idea there. Anyway, this also looks forward to our coming videos on Eliphas Lévy, and we'll talk about Lévy's own views on the Paris Commune, which I think are an important thing for him. All right, so here we see an exquisite corpse, one of the collage variety produced by the Surrealist group. Now, this particular exquisite corpse, as a manifestation of Surrealist art within the world of New Paris, plays a really important role in the novella, becomes a kind of companion to Thibault, accompanies him on his journeys, and engages in a number of scenes of combat against the Nazis and demons, and as we will see, plays a really important role at the conclusion and climax of the novella. But here, this is from a bit earlier, kind of in the sort of middle sections, where in another combat with Nazi forces here, we read about this exquisite corpse that it tugs back like a playful horse. It turns an ancient-eyed attention to the officers of the Reich. It puffs out its cheeks and semaphores its limbs, wheezes into its beard, rips into the street with the edges of its machinery body. A tear full of white. The edges of reality break. The Nazis stagger on the wrong side, and broken bits of car crumble into that papery void. So here we have this manif rupturing reality itself, which is revealed to be a kind of fourth wall breaking here, that their reality is composed of paper, of words, is even the narrative that you are actually reading, so that in a nice kind of fourth wall breaking bit here, he's able to defeat the Nazi forces by sort of tearing into the page that is the the foundation for their appearance here. And again, just emphasizing the nature of the world of New Paris as the world of the imagination, or the world of art and literature itself. All right, and then I want to spend a bit of time here talking about the way the novella stages surrealist anti-fascist struggle, which I think is important. Well, partially it's important for understanding surrealism, both conceptually and historically, the role that anti-fascism played in surrealism's history, the inherently anti-fascist outlook or orientation of surrealism and the surrealist movement and surrealist creations, which I think is important, especially when someone like Salvador Dali continues to be held up as the poster boy within kind of the popular imagination or popular understanding of surrealism, despite the fact that Dali was a reactionary figure and a fascist sympathizer, and expressed admiration for Adolf Hitler. I think it's important to have works that continue to speak to the true radical orientation and the liberatory intention and potential of the movement. And, engaging, actually, just a kind of side note here, I think Miéville does a really good job of engaging with the history of surrealism and following on, especially the transformed understanding of surrealism and the within kind of art history and art criticism, and giving more recognition and place to both female surrealists as well as non-white surrealists. I think Miéville does a really nice job of doing that and including them and giving them important places within the world of New Paris, which is also relevant to anti-fascist struggle as well, of course. And I think one way of thinking about the importance of the creativity and radical forms of art and culture for the development of anti-fascism and these kinds of struggles is, I guess it's a kind of negative approach to thinking about it, by looking at how important those same domains and struggle within those domains is to fascist movements and to Nazism in particular, where the Nazi Party and the Nazi High Command, they certainly saw as an important part of their program the development and of a particular aesthetic that expressed their vision and their values, and the promotion of sort of artists and architects that expressed those that vision, and also their condemnation and persecution and destruction of artists and works of art that were threatening to the kind of world order that they were trying to create, what they labeled as degenerate art, which certainly included surrealism, as well as a number of other modern art, many other modern artists and modern art movements. That we can see that they felt that there was something threatening, that there was something worth attacking, something worth destroying, that these things were genuine threats to what they were trying to achieve, and that, I think is a kind of negative proof of the importance of developing and supporting and amplifying those visions that are so threatening to these movements. All right, so here we have the epigraph to the novella, which is a quotation from the British surrealist and painter and practicing psychoanalyst, Grace Palethorpe. Now, we talked about Palethorpe a little bit. We saw at least one of her works of art, and actually, I think we even looked at this quotation in the long video on surrealism from earlier in this video series. So we won't spend much more time talking about her work here. There's at least a couple of appearances of her artworks in Last Days of New Paris as well. She appears not just in this epigraph here. Anyways, Palethorpe writes, "One overhears many reactions to surrealist art, but the most pathetic of all is from those who ask, what am I supposed to see and feel from this? In other words, what does Papa say I may think and feel about this?" So I think this is a great insight here, that whenever we demand to simply be told what a work of art means, or we imagine ourselves as kind of passive receivers of a predetermined, singular meaning or sort of privileged form of experience that is supposed to issue from a work of art and just be kind of like stamped upon our minds or our experience, that we are always effectively making an appeal to a paternal or a patriarchal authority, to a master who is simply going to tell us, what things mean and what we're supposed to feel. Now, I imagine that Palethorpe would think that is a pathetic response to any work of art, but I think that pathetic quality is only the more obvious or the louder in response to surrealist art, which, good surrealist art is always a vision of a really radical form of freedom and a really radical form of openness, and to make that sort of appeal to authority is just a complete either blindness to that freedom or just a complete refusal, or even a kind of pushing away or casting off of that form of freedom. Now, I think this insight in the context of the novella, the fact that Miéville uses this or places this quotation in the context of Last Days of New Paris, only really draws out the really radical implications here, and I think really helps to develop this, what we're talking about here as a surrealist or an anti-fascist aesthetic here, in that I think again, by placing this within the context of the novella, there's the suggestion that this patriarchal authority that is appealed to when we ask for that sort of meaning in a work of art, that there's something homologous about that appeal to patriarchal authority with submission to fascism, or to the way that fascism is always, in the fascist leader in particular, is always this incredibly extremely almost exaggeratedly patriarchal paternal figure of authority. All right, so I've had a bit of an interruption in the recording process here, but just coming back to where we left off. So what we're going to do for the rest of the video here is look at two of the more important confrontations between Thibault and his allies and the various surrealist beings and magical powers that he's able to work with, their confrontations with two of the Nazi manifs. Now, it's important background here that whereas the Nazi manifs emerged spontaneously after the S-blast and inhabit Paris, and at least it's implied that they inhabit Paris in fairly large numbers, and they completely transform the city into a really surrealist version of Paris. The Nazis have to work quite hard to produce their own manifs, as if speaking to the really imitative quality of Nazi art, that it's not in any sense an authentic. There's no vision, there's no life, there's nothing authentic about this movement and this creation of Nazi artwork, but it's a kind of imitation of a modern art movement. Now, partially the Nazis overcome that through their alliance with Hell, and their ability to get these kind of demonic allies into Paris, but we still see them working quite hard and even engaging in horrific and destructive experiments to try to bring their own artworks to creation, destroying living surrealist works of art to try to harness their energies. So first confrontation we'll talk about here is with one of Arno Brecker's sculptures. Now, the sculpture we see in the novella, I think, is just a kind of generic Brecker sculpture. I don't think it's a particular one, though that works just fine. Brecker's sculptures are all quite generic. It's also quite larger than I'm aware of any of Brecker's actual works being. But in any case, so we see an example of the kind of sculpture that we're talking about here, an example of one of Brecker's sculptures there on the left, and then we see on the right, we see Brecker in the photograph on the right. That's Brecker on the right-hand side. On the left is the architect, Alfred Speer, who is the official architect of the Nazi Party, much like Brecker was the official sculptor of the Nazi Party. And of course, that is Hitler in the center there, with the Eiffel Tower behind them on their art tour that they did in Paris after the occupation. And then the description we get in the novella of Brecker's works, we read, Arno Brecker's looming, kitsch, retrograde marble figures stare with vacant stares of notional mastery. Übermensch twee. Even in Paris, they have always been stubbornly lifeless, Thibault has thought. Übermensch twee is a fantastic phrase, and I think this is a really good characterization. The description of these works as kitsch, I think, is exactly the right way of characterizing them. Not that there can't be something charming about some things that we could describe as kitsch, but that kitsch quality is so clearly in opposition or in a kind of unresolved, unconscious contradiction with this notional mastery. They're intending to project this image of a masculine power and authority, and this idealized image of the hypermasculine body. But they're completely undermined by that kitsch twee aspect of them. I think it's a great perceptive description there, and mocking Nazi works of art certainly brings out some good prose from Miéville. Right, and then two more sculptures of Brecker's here. This is a pair of figures that he created to flank the entranceway to the Reich Chancellery building, which we see in the lower left there. Now, this building, the architect for it was Alfred Speer, who we just saw on the previous screen there. And you can see in the architecture some of the same qualities that we just talked about with Brecker. He's clearly doing a kind of neoclassical, kind of integration of classical style with the modern, but it all just feels like a shallow, empty imitation of an idealized version of a much like with the Nazi ideological construction of this once great Germany that they were trying to resurrect or return to. Here we have a kind of imitation of a past that never existed, and an idea, a shallow, cliched idea of what a clean, classical, heroic, masculine, hard sort of architectural style would be like. Which is such a contrast to the surrealist relationship to the past, where they are constantly looking back at what remains unrealized or what is still alive, what's been forgotten, what remains sort of active within the cultural unconscious, and what can be transformed and processed and recontextualized in order to create something new. This is just the imitation of a past that never happened. Similarly, I think with the contradiction here, you can see in the Brecker sculptures there. Let's see. So, first of all, the sculpture on the right holding the sword represents the army, and then the sculpture on the left holding the torch represents the party. Lighting the way forward for Germany or whatever. But you can see how in the figures, this strong, masculine, clean, heroic, idealized version of the male body and this kind of violent male power is undermined by the rather mannerist, exaggerated quality of their poses. Like the figure on the right, particularly, he looks like he's kind of hyperextending his shoulder there, right? This is nothing like the natural sort of pose that we would get in actual classical or Renaissance art. There's something really exaggerated about this, but in a way that exaggeration clearly can't be integrated with what's intended here, right? That you can't have a kind of mannerist image of the Nazi war machine. It just doesn't fit. So its contradictions undermine and weaken it itself. Unlike with surrealism, where you have the full self-conscious embracing of contradictory images. And I think we nowhere more clearly see this intentional embrace of contradiction than in the practice of the exquisite corpse. So two examples here of exquisite corpses, which for those who aren't familiar, these were kind of communal works of art that were produced where the first artist would draw, I think they usually began with the head. So the first artist would, like the image on the left, Man Ray, I believe, drew the head there. So Man Ray draws the head and then folds the piece of paper over so that just the neck, just the bottom little bit of what he drew is visible to the next artist, who then draws the torso and then folds the paper again and passes it along. And then eventually you get this figure that is produced that no individual artist could see the whole of until it's complete. So you get both the opening up of the unconscious and the elaboration of the little bit that is, whatever that suggests to the unconscious of the next artist, and also an opening to, to chance and to this combination of elements that occurs by chance. And there's obviously in that an opening to the unconscious and to humor, to the ridiculous, the grotesque, the monstrous, the absurd, all the things that are so clearly repressed and denied by the Nazi approach to aesthetics. And in that, I think, especially in that embrace of the unconscious, we really see the contrast here between the surrealist and the Nazi aesthetics, where Brecker's sculptures are completely undermined by their own unconscious. Brecker's clearly making those works with a very predetermined idea of what they're going to mean and what they're going to convey and how they're going to function, and what their significance is going to be. But it's all the things that Brecker doesn't know about his own sculptures that really undermine them and make them ridiculous and bad works of art. Whereas for the surrealists, the opening to the unconscious and the opening to its powers is an opening to the mysterious, the spontaneous, that which is which the individual ego could never produce. The communal nature of the exquisite corpses is important too. That whereas the Nazi artist is we could almost say relating to their materials in the way that a kind of patriarchal dictator functions, impressing his will upon the nation or the people, this vision of the singular authority. Through this communal activity, something emerges that no particular individual could have determined in advance, and so there's that inherent refusal of individual mastery, and I think there's something really radical about that in surrealist art. And I also think that earlier in the novella, in the 1941 sequences, like we talked about in part 1, when Jack Parsons sees the surrealists in Marseille making exquisite corpses, that's the moment where he realizes the magical power that is contained within these works, and that there's something there that he can work with to make the S-bomb. And I think there's a nice insight there too about the way that he recognizes in this practice something that is deeply resonant with his own practice of thelemic magic, which in a very shallow reading, where the do what thou wilt could be very easily confused with the Nazi ideal of will, right? I mean, both of those philosophies talk about will, but it's to Miéville's credit that he realizes that the thelemic and magical understanding of will is on the side of the surrealists, rather than on the side of the Nazi art here. Now, beyond simply the realm of art and aesthetics, I think we can also see in this confrontation between the Brecker sculpture and some of the other Nazi manifs that we see throughout the novella, and the exquisite corpse, and another surrealist manif that we'll see in a moment here. There is also a confrontation between two different images of the human and the human body, and that this is certainly true in Nazi ideology, that the image of the body and of the healthy body also functioned as an image of society. So it's not just that, like in this Brecker sculpture that we see here, it's not just that this image is a particular, like a male, white, Aryan, able-bodied image, or the way that it constructs masculinity, an idealized masculine body as always containing the potential for violence and the ability to dominate and to master through the application of physical violence. But it's also that image of the clean, healthy, self-identical, perfected body functions as an image of a kind of false image of a healthy society. So that in Nazi ideology, the societies, and in German society in particular, obviously, are constructed as organic wholes, and it is understood that the collective body of the German people is made sick through the infection by foreign elements, and that to return this body to health, those foreign elements, which are obviously Jewish people first and foremost, though not exclusively, those foreign elements have to be exterminated. The body has to be purified of all of its foreign elements to return it to health. But of course, that's not how bodily health actually works. Our human bodies are actually much more like exquisite corpses. We are ecosystems. We need all of our gut bacteria, our gut flora. We need the non-human within ourselves. Those foreign elements are necessary for health. Absolute uniformity and a complete kind of self-identical body is a corpse, right? The living is always in constant change and transformation. Is always contains the other and is in constant exchange with the other. Now, in the realm of nature, that's, I think, even more clear. There is, again, in Nazi ideology, the construction of a certain kind of idealized image of nature that denies hybridity and symbiosis and transformation and mutation and evolution and the constant dynamic evolution of the whole and the interdependence and sort of penetration and interaction of all of its parts. And so I think we see if we want to say that nature and the human body are more like exquisite corpses, then, society is as well. And that is that communal sense of the conjunction of diverse elements that through their conjunction and interaction produce something that no single individual, through its kind of mastery and domination of the whole, could ever possibly produce. So while the Surrealists were in Marseille awaiting passage to the United States and out of France after the occupation, they designed a new deck of playing cards, not tarot cards, but a traditional playing card deck. And so they designed 4 new suits for the deck, and then they designed to replace the court cards. They picked 12 figures, a mixture of historical figures and fictional ones, to replace the traditional king, queen, and jack of each one of the suits. So I think it's pretty clear that in the video game of Last Days of New Paris, you would be able, these would function as kind of power up sort of items or whatever. You'd collect them at different stages of the game, and then you'd be able to play them when faced with a particularly difficult battle or challenge or whatever. So earlier in the novella, and this is the only card that we actually see in the course of the novella, Thibaut had picked up this card that we see here, the Siren of Keyholes, or the Siren of Locks, depicting the medium Helen Smith. Smith was a spiritualist medium who was a big inspiration on the Surrealists and a big inspiration for their practice of automatic writing. So Smith began by, I think she was kind of channeling figures from ancient India and, doing that kind of, which is a very typical sort of theosophical society, spiritualist sort of thing to do. But then she begins to channel beings from Mars and believes herself to be in communication with Mars, and receives a Martian alphabet and the Martian language, and goes on through her writings and her art to describe the inhabitants of Mars. And so the Surrealists, obviously didn't take this literally, but found it very inspiring, the way that through her unconscious was able to create this this fantastic narrative and a whole new language and alphabet that was completely outside of her conscious control. So anyways, Thibaut had found this card and now plays it to help with the struggle against the Brecker sculpture. Let's see. So I'll read a few excerpts from this scene. The Siren of Keyholes becomes, between Thibaut and the soldiers and the staggering Nazi Manif, is a wide-eyed woman in smart and dated clothes. She is not like a person. The lines of her are not the lines of matter. She gabbles. Thibaut is staring at a dream of Helen Smith, the psychic, dead 20 years and commemorated in a card, glossolalia channeler of a strange imagined Mars. the inaugurated thought of her. Her avatar invoking a spirit in a new suit in a new deck. Keyholes for knowledge. She writes in the air with her finger. Glowing script appears in no Earth alphabet. So here we see on the screen on the right is an example of the Martian writing in the Martian alphabet that she channeled. And then on the left, a drawing of hers depicting the Martian landscape and its inhabitants and their civilization. Continuing on, Smith's letters crackle, and in the sky there is a rushing. The night clouds race. A fiery circle is coming down, coming in. A dream's dream, a Manif of Manif Smith's conjurations of a Martian craft spinning. And then skipping ahead just a little bit. Now the cartomantic Smith is pulling into presence the crafts of more Martians and troll-like ultra-Martians. Her extraterrestrial contacts exist, at last, in this moment, and they are descending, tearing into the air, firing. The Smith thing exalts. Bolts burn, twist, melt metal. Fire descends and holds the earth. A fusillade out of the sky engulfs the Nazis and their smashed Manif giant. There is a sound and light cataclysm. So here we have the Brecker Manif, this image of the violent, masculine, domineering power, destroyed by a woman whose power comes from her ability to tap into the unbridled potential of the human imagination, and that it's through her unconscious, through this really unconstrained ability to imagine new forms and new societies and new forms of life in the way that she did, new languages, that it is that power that overcomes the Nazi image. And then finally, jumping to the end of not the end of the book, but the end of the main narrative, the end of the events of 1950, the final confrontation with a Manif out of one of Hitler's self-portraits. And as we see on the left there, Hitler's portrait of himself sitting on a stone bridge overlooking a river. And so again, we'll just read through a few excerpts from this section and talk about it a bit. The young man makes it with every look, is re-establishing Paris in pastel outlines. No, not re-establishing, but establishing newly, a simpering pretense, as it never had been, a cloying imaginary. So the Hitler Manif is endowed with the power to make new Paris, to make the world around him as it is in Hitler's paintings. So at first it seems as if all the rubble and the surreal elements of New Paris are being erased, and Paris is being returned to how it was. But then here we're getting the realization that it's actually being established as a memory of a past that never existed, a cleansed, purified image of a past that never existed. And this, the description of Hitler's artwork as a cloying imaginary is a great description. And we see another one of Hitler's paintings there on the right, which is just a beyond cliche, dead, flat image of prettiness. Continuing on, another excerpt here. A little blank-faced non-entity. That's the Hitler out of there's this kind of funny joke about how he's blank-faced because Hitler could never draw human faces. So the Manif is similarly blank, just this ultimate image of a kind of generic, lifeless being, with no character, no vitality. A little blank-faced non-entity, bringing peace and prettiness, ending the rubble. Where there is discord, there it brings peace. Not even of death, but of nihil. Paris will be an empty city of charming houses. This is what the Führer's self-portrait proclaims. So now, in the previous sequence, the exquisite corpse had been nearly destroyed, and Thibaut has been carrying just its head, along with the train and leaf and caterpillar that is part of the exquisite corpse's head. And now, unable to stop the Hitler Manif or to resist its power to to fully incorporate anything that it looks at into this flat, dead, empty realm of mere prettiness, Thiebaud hurled the head of the exquisite corpse at the Hitler Manif. And now the Manif, at first it seems that the Manif has done the same thing to the exquisite corpse's head, annihilated it, fully incorporated it into this realm of Hitler's artistic vision, or what passes for an artistic vision. So it seems that this too has been defeated, but then something begins to change. So pick back up here with another excerpt. There is an unfolding, a shuffling of presence. Now the watercolor wears some misplaced boot on one foot. A Manif boot abruptly appeared. Its head was not chosen by its artist. The faceless Manif of Adolf Hitler is randomizing. There is a fluttering, a cascade of options. As Thiebaud watches, a quick clicking circuit of alternative objects comes into place as the Manif's head. Now its legs are not its legs, but a succession of other things, in random stutter. Its body, too, it is becoming a triple figure. So here, in attempting to incorporate the exquisite corpse into itself, it becomes an exquisite corpse, and its body begins to become contradictory and multiple. And then continuing on. And though he can still see the brown of its original suit and the distinctive and ugly emptiness of its head slip into position repeatedly among the parts that have started to make it up, to concatenate randomly, the flailing Manif is no more defined by them than by the fruit, the bricks, the lizards, the windows and lavender and railway lines and endless other things that are suddenly, also, for instance, its components. It is becoming exquisite corpse. It is remade. It is without artist. And in its wake, as its wan precision is replaced by that stochastic rigor, that self-dream dream, the buildings that it saw into twee perfection are less perfect again. They quiver. Their colors bleed. They are too saturated. Their lines are wrong. They remember their cracks. And then with the breaths of stone dust they are back to ruination, or are not there, or are battered by age, scarred with the stuff of history again. All right, so here we have the defeat of the Hitler Manif through its becoming exquisite corpse. A bunch of interesting things, I think, happening in this passage. First of all, in the first paragraph here, I think it's interesting that the text is at pains to show that it's not that the Hitler Manif has been annihilated or no longer exists, but the images of the parts of the Manif become just elements among many others, and that's all that needs to happen for it to be destroyed, that it needs to simply be not only the only thing that exists, that when this image of flat, static, uniform perfection is simply incorporated into a more dynamic, multiple, contradictory collage, that it no longer is what it is anymore. That unlike where the Hitler Manif and the Nazi program generally has to annihilate or destroy anything that is foreign, anything that, whether that's people that are designated as foreign, or works of art like surrealist works of art that are designated as degenerate. The Nazi project can only approach those things through an attempt to annihilate them and to completely remove them from existence, whereas the exquisite corpse seems to represent or herald a more expansive view of reality that doesn't need to eliminate what is other and doesn't need to eliminate what is threatening, including something like Nazism, but that in being incorporated into that expansive and sense of reality that is open to contradiction and the imagination and the unconscious, those things just no longer are what they are. And the Manif is through this incorporation completely stripped of its power, and through this the world of New Paris goes back to being what it is, and including history too. I think that last line, that this flat reality that had been imposed upon it is removed, history returns. And so that for things to include their own history is to be a surreal image, to be a cut up, that the Nazi vision of reality is necessarily ahistorical, even though it invokes an image of a history and seems to make appeal to history and a return, to the greatness of a German past. It is actually ahistorical, and that it is in imperfection and multiplicity and contradiction that actual history can be present and can exist. And so similarly, I think with what I said about it's not that images of an organic image of human societies or human civilization is the problem. It's rather a false image and a kind of purified, homogeneous, flat image of these things. Similarly with history, it's not that an appeal to history is the problem. It's that the Nazi version of history is not actually historical, that it's a purified, cleansed, homogeneous, self-consistent, non-contradictory image of history that is the issue here. And that I think this is fascinating, that although surrealism is this incredibly, avant-garde, modern form of art, that the surrealists were committed to the radical transformation of society and the total destruction of the sort of bourgeois values that had and the capitalism and structures of authority that had dominated society up until that point. It is actually surrealism that is on the side of actual living history in all of its messiness and its imperfections and its contradictions. All right, and then just to draw us to a close here, we can circle back around to a quotation. This is from the end of the frame narrative, a quotation that we already looked at in its larger context in part 1 of this video. Perhaps some understanding of the nature of the manifest of New Paris, of the source and power of art and manifestation, may be of some help to us in times to come. So I'm not going to say too much more about that. I hope I've made the case for that and done at least some elaboration, certainly not complete and total elaboration of the ways in which I think that's true, and some of the promise and potential and importance of what's articulated throughout the novella, and the way that art, like esotericism and history, are realms that are worth struggling for and are certainly not complete and total as territories to struggle over, but are certainly important zones of contestation and are worth fighting for. So thanks for watching. As always, if you think what I'm doing is valuable here, you can like the videos, subscribe to the channel. I kind of hate all this algorithm stuff, but it really does help people find this material and connects it to people that might find it valuable or interesting. Also, if anyone wants to share it with people who you think might be interested, definitely appreciate it. Let's see, so I will be back in the near future with starting a new video series looking at the works of Ithell Colquhoun and examining some of his writings and thinking about his central role in the esoteric revival of the 19th century and the birth of modern esotericism. And that'll be a great foundation for moving beyond that to looking at the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley and their teachings and rituals and practices and the whole the whole ecosystem of 20th century and 21st century esotericism and occult practice. So yeah, thanks again for watching. See you next time.